I just got three things to say. God bless our troops. God bless America. And Trump.
See, this is really interesting, though. This whole ethos. Like, how is it that the party that screams law and order is filled with legislators that are total fucking felons? So baffling to me, because every time there's a felony, a charge, whatever, they are all just convinced that no, it's made up, they're out to get them, right? But they scream about law and order. Then they say, we're going to go vote for the felon, even though there's a lot of evidence of his felonies, enough for grand juries to get all these indictments. No, you're right. The law and order applies to locking up the people of color and the poor. This red pill law and order bullshit. See, I don't like the phrase law and order, because the phrase law and order is like super loaded. Dallas has a crime rate of 46 per 1,000 residents. It has one of the highest crime rates in America. And yet he says he goes to a town that has one of the highest crime rates in America and he feels safe. But when he's in LA, he doesn't feel safe. At that point, it's like his idea of safety isn't even rooted in the actual crime. It's rooted in the perception. He's ingesting some perception that crime in LA is so much worse than everywhere else. Probably using phrases like smash and grab. When I was younger, it was carjacking was the big fear. That was the thing. Everyone was like, you're going to get carjacked. It was the thing they used as an excuse to pile a bunch of Nazi fucking cops on the street to harass the residents and to funnel people of color into the prison system, was to make sure all the white people were afraid of being carjacked. It's like there's perception and reality. But like the weird thing is when you have somebody who's saying they feel unsafe in LA, but Dallas has a higher crime rate than LA, but they feel safe in Dallas, at that point, their feeling of safety is not actually attached to the crime data. Their feeling of safety is coming from something else. And that's one of the things that is operative in the red pill philosophy, is they like to generalize this idea that in the red areas, they are safe. And in the blue areas, they are not safe. That is something they internalize. The same way that they think the economy is bad when the Democrats are in office, and the minute Trump wins, everyone's like, wow, this economy is actually pretty good. And the reason why it's hard to stop, because the way you stop it is by alleviating poverty and offering access to education. But nobody wants to do those steps. They don't want to make people's lives better. It's like we keep making it difficult for people, and the gap between the people who have something and the people who don't gets wider and wider and wider and wider and wider. Okay? You know what I mean? And this idea, though, that there's like an increase in crime, there's not. Crime is way down from what it was in the 90s. Way down. Like all these millennial people crying about crime in LA, but like, dude, when I was like 10 years old and I walked to school, there were active serial killers, like the Hillside Strangler, driving around in vans, picking people up and murdering them. It wasn't like you're wearing a $20,000 watch and you're worried about your fancy watch getting stolen. It was like you were a kid walking to grade school thinking maybe a van was going to snatch you up and you were going to get murdered. There's always been crime. And in cities, there's always going to be crime. And the bigger the gap between the people with the $20,000 watch and the people that are living in tents on the street, the wider that gap gets, the more crime you have. And as long as there's places like Amazon where criminals can sell their shit and Jeff Bezos can get political power from it, they're going to let that shit kind of go on. And then what are you going to do? You're going to start like processing people who steal shit. You're going to put them in prison, which brings a whole nother expense. And then when they get out, after they go in prison system, what do? They go back to a life of crime. More than likely, the crime is happening with people who are uneducated and people who are in poverty or came from poverty. But again, guys, this idea that you're not safe, there is no reason, especially if you're a white male, there's no reason for us to feel unsafe. There are transgender people who feel unsafe because every time they go into the bathroom, they don't know if they're going to get arrested or beat up or murdered. There are women who live in states where if they have a complication trying to have a kid, they know the doctor's going to let them bleed out more than likely. Or black people who could get pulled over by a cop and may get shot. But if you're walking around in fear of somebody stealing your watch or breaking into you should go see a therapist. There's no reason for you to live in fear of that. Dude, we live in a world now. There's a lot of really poor people. There's a lot of homeless people. And there's a lot of people walking around with $20,000 watches or diamond encrusted necklaces driving $150,000 cars. And if you're doing that, if you're wearing a $20,000 watch, driving a $200,000 car, and you're literally parking in front of homeless people while you go into your party, dude, you're kind of like creating the environment that's causing people to need to steal. You know what I mean? Like maybe as a society, if we stopped buying $50,000 watches and started building homes for the homeless and eradicating poverty, maybe we wouldn't have these problems. But what's funny is the people driving a $300,000 car want to talk about how bad crime is. And it's like, but those guys are kind of the fucking criminals because somewhere along the line, they're in some class of society that is taking a bunch of wealth because other people are fucking struggling. And that's my problem. Like I got into it with 𝗏𝗏 on Twitter because he was like, dude, you can't walk anywhere without stepping in human shit. But here's the problem. One, 𝗏𝗏 has enough money that he could literally step in human shit, give his shoes to a homeless person, and go buy a brand new pair of shoes. And he could do that every day. And he would still be rich as hell. And he'd be helping the homeless. But instead, he's worried about the shit on his really nice, fancy sneakers. That's selfish. That's fucking arrogant. And number two, when he steps in human shit, he's not concerned about the human that shit there. What is that human going through? You know what I mean? Like how low and how beaten by the world and our society and the big city does a human being have to be that he's like shitting on the fucking street? It's heartbreaking that somebody's in that position. That's the problem. Is you have these rich motherfuckers that step in shit and they want to hate the person who shit and they want to be oblivious and they're like, why isn't this problem out of my sight? But you know the problem is those rich motherfuckers sucking up all the resources and not being aware of how they're sucking up all the resources is harming the rest of the fucking world. The real problem that we have is we have a lot of wealthy people upset that they have to deal with the suffering of all the people that are suffering because they're able to hoard all that wealth. And in America or in the world, if you are very wealthy, that means a whole bunch of other people are impoverished. That's what capitalism is, guys. If you're up here, you only are up there because a whole bunch of people are suffering. Everybody who's wealthy in America, they do have some debt of gratitude to alleviate the suffering of human beings. And that really, dude, I got really upset at 𝗏𝗏 in that little thing. There were a couple times where he and I sort of interacted on Twitter, and I got really upset because I used to respect him until I saw that, like, no, man, he's another one of these guys who, like, you know, was a drug addict and got super wealthy. Now he's like judge and jury of everyone else that is suffering because he fancies himself as so above it all and how he pulled himself out of the muck. You know what I'm saying? And you're never going to see me wearing a $50,000 fucking watch and complaining about homeless people because I'm better than that. I am. I'm not going to walk around with tokens of immense wealth while people are dying in homeless camps in the vicinity. Because if you're doing that, you are part of the problem. Like, come on, man. That's our problem. Our problem is we revere that shit. Dude, we celebrate wealth and then we punish the poor. Dude, it makes me sad a little bit. It does. It makes me sad. I've never liked Logan or Jake Paul, but I did like Mike. But I've not liked watching him red pill, but whatever. I tried to point out to him, okay? Because like I said, I'm a drug addict too, 17 years sober. I relate to his struggle. He said something once where he said, man, he's like, I was driving my sister's shitty Jeep. And he's like, the poor people, you guys are so lucky. He's like, when I'm driving my sister's shitty Jeep around, everyone is so nice to me, letting me out into traffic and being so nice to me. You poor people are so lucky. When I drive my Beamer around, everybody's a dick to me and like cutting me off and shit. And you know what I told him? I said, homie, you got it wrong, dude. What you're not seeing is your attitude when you drive your sister's beat up Jeep is different. When you're driving your BMW, you're literally driving around like you're better than everyone and you own the place. And so the appearance is everyone is combative with you, but some of that is maybe coming from them because you're driving in this fancy car. But some of it is most certainly coming from you. Your attitude is different driving a $200,000 BMW than it is when you're driving a fucking Pinto. When you're driving a Pinto, you're much more meek. You're not using your vehicle the same way that if you're walking around the street with a $50,000 watch on your arm, you are telegraphing to the world around you a sense of your value and their value, and people will react to you differently. How we use those symbols of wealth and shit really affects the world. And you're right. You know, everyone trying to fit into social media norms, it's gotten really bad. Like, I would like to see us as a world just stop revering wealth and start revering compassion and vulnerability and caring about the plight of people that are less off. Like, stop taking a picture of your BMW and start taking a picture of you driving a less fancy car and you taking some money and investing in a company that builds houses for the homeless, you know? Stop trying to be a billionaire and start reallocating the wealth of billionaires to the people that are generating it. And I mean, we can all get on board with this, guys. We really can. Like, you got to stop worshiping wealth like we do as a society. But anyway, if you look at it nationwide in America, big city or not, it's like 1 or 2% of people on average even encounter a crime. But then they hear stories. They hear stories about crime. And depending on what political group you hang out in or whatever, people stir it up. If you watch a Republican news channel, all they will do is talk about crime. Like, keeping you scared is part of how they keep you buying shit. But you don't have to be afraid. If you feel a lot of fear about being safe, there's some type of trauma operating that's making you feel unsafe. If you feel unsafe, you're worried about crime, you feel like you're on edge all the time, go to a therapist. Go do some EMDR. Take up a discipline like yoga, meditation. Go do some tapping. Have an acupuncturist treat you. Do some cupping. There's like so many things you can do to work the trauma out of your body and out of your life. And I mean, dude, a lot of people live in a lot of different kinds of fear. Some people fear death and they become sort of health nuts and they become overly stressed about their health and what they eat and how much they exercise. And then sometimes those guys are perfect physical specimens and they die of a heart attack at like 35. It's like, dude, it's just one of those things where if you feel afraid all the time, treat that condition. Stop blaming you know what I mean? You're not being personally targeted. Dude, this is pretty rare to have a black woman who's a Maga supporter. That is rare. This is less rare.
Voting Donald Trump, baby.
Look at them. They're wearing their little matching outfits. They got the makeup caked on. So much of the Trump voting bloc are these chicks, bro. Crazy, too. It's baffling to me, boss. I mean, I would never date a Trump voting woman. I wouldn't, dude. There's no way. Like, the only people who would date a Trump voting women are guys who don't have any respect for women. If you have no respect for women, these women are like easy targets. They bought these jeans ripped. The type of women who would buy pre-ripped jeans. Fancy jeans that have holes in order to look street or rock and roll. I think of shabby chic. Remember shabby chic? You remember that phrase? For a while on Craigslist, there was a phrase that they would say called shabby chic. And what it was a way of like selling anything that was shit and old and just worthless. The phrase shabby chic would try to imply that it had some kind of like value. And like these women are like shabby chic. I'm not saying they don't have value, don't get me wrong, because they do. But the way they are willing to devalue themselves as a means of trying to be amenable and valuable. It's what Caitlyn Jenner does. Caitlyn Jenner goes to Mar-a-Lago and she devalues herself by disavowing all other trans women and being negative to trans women, but she does it. She degrades herself in order to be the trans woman that they accept. And I guarantee you when she goes to Mar-a-Lago, she uses the fucking women's restroom. And I guarantee you that nobody there has a problem with her using the women's restroom. Because if you're the right kind of trans woman, you can use the woman's restroom. If you're a trans woman that they have decided. See, this is crazy. Like Gen X, my generation of men was the largest voting bloc for Donald Trump. And dude, I will never understand that in a million years, man. Because I feel like my generation of men, we grew up being raised to believe the Donald Trump sort of shtick. We got raised to be womanizers. We got raised to believe that men are superior and to believe these messages about people of color and the inner city and the LGBTQ. Like we were raised with all these ideas about how we're supposed to have all the answers and we're supposed to get a degree and bring home the bacon and all that shit. And then we watched men of our generation die of drug overdoses and jump out of the stockbroker office window and shit. We watched guys like die after putting in 50 years with the company and having nothing to show for it. Breaking your back on construction sites and never getting a piece of the pie. And yet they are still doing it. It's crazy, bro. I'll never understand it. I understand young men, young white men right now. I understand we're in a time where white men have consequences and they don't have all the privilege they once had. So young white men can be growing up in this world and it's very confusing because all the men that are older than them never had any consequences. And everything was easy. And now they're growing up in a world where it's not a guaranteed success. They still have a ton of privilege, but it's not like so easy where you can be a up and just show up. And that's why they look at somebody like Donald Trump, who is a up, but he shows up and gets everything anyway. And they idolize that because they want it to be that easy for them. So I understand them buying in, but I do not understand men my age who watched what happens when you live that ethos, and we watch the harm it does to women, and we watch the harm it does to everyone around them and them, right? And we should know better.
And Kamala, who locked up plenty of black men for sport. So we're worried about who's going to be the first woman president. And, you know, I think I'm more excited about who's going to be the first felon president, because I know who I'm voting for.
Dude, what is this woman even talking about, dude? What kind of word salad was that? First off, they never say her name right. It's like the disrespect. But the way she said that Kamala Harris locked up people for sport, you know what I mean? It's like, what's crazy about this, guys, is when Kamala Harris locked people up, they're saying like, oh, you did too much law and order. But then you have these same MAGA idiots who are in here saying we need more law and order. There's not enough law and order. But Kamala Harris was too much law and order. But the felony rapist guy is just going to be the perfect amount of law and order. And that's how you know that it's just about advancing the culture of whiteness.